Hi, it is Janet Fitch, and this is Writing Wednesdays. And I've just had some terrible news, not terrible, but professional news that I didn't like very much. So if you notice a subdued self, life is full of ups and downs, and no matter how far along you are, there's ups and downs. And so it's up to us to, luckily we still have the work, and the work continues, and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are going to keep firing no matter where you are in your world. So maybe, that's a bit of information that if you're suffering some kind of disappointment, it never stops, It never stops. Everybody gets it. And, you just have to be grateful for the opportunity to even be in the way of such disappointments. So anyway, today's topic is going to be beginnings, which I think is a very cheerful topic. It was asked of me 2 weeks ago by Valerie. Valerie, if you're out there, this one's for you. So the question was about beginnings, chapter beginnings, story beginnings, and novel beginnings. Where do you start, and what should you be thinking about? Normally I would say, yay, hi Valerie. Normally I would just say, write the way you're going to, and you will end up structuring the beginning. Usually once you get the ending, you'll have to go back to the beginning and think about where you're starting from. Beginnings are your gateway. You're announcing to the reader what what the terrain is, what the tone is going to be, what the style is going to be. You're giving a sense of the size of what you're talking about. So, I am a firm believer that a novel opening should be different than a short story opening. A short story opening has to come off the blocks pretty fast. You don't have time for a big slow build. Hi Linda, you're gonna jump in. A novel opening doesn't have to rush. If you're going to have a fairly, nice sized book, you want to show the pace, that it's not just going to be this madcap rush, that there's going to be, there's been some world that's going to be created for you that you can enter. So, you often set up the beginning so that people can walk into a world. So a novel opening might start a little further back. You put the camera a little farther back than a short story opening where, boom, and you're off and running. I thought I would, and then a chapter opening, I generally, the popular wisdom is you start as close to the beginning of the action as you can. So there's not a huge long build into, you don't want a 4-page build up to a 12-page scene, or a 10-page scene. It just will seem that it gets into what I call the exits and entrances problem, where you spend so much time getting into a scene that you don't have the juice for the scene. Many people do that, and it's common to do it because because the writer themselves has to come into the scene and understand and get there. But once you're there, notice what you don't need and get rid of it, compress it. So this is really often an editing question rather than a writing question. You just start the scene of you're following your character. They get up in the morning, they do this, they do that. Maybe you as the writer needed that, but your reader does not need that. The reader has gone to enough movies that they've seen a cut and somebody is suddenly in the office. They do not need to see them making their peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Maybe you needed to see that. And you know, you can save some of that material and have them eat their peanut butter sandwich while they're having a meeting, but we don't need to see them make it. So it's two questions. How do you write beginnings, and then how do you shape beginnings that they'll work properly in proportion to what they're unfolding. So I have, when I was teaching this, I made a, or when I was learning it, I think, just for my own sake, I made a list of some really good, what I considered really good openings. And having done it for myself, it didn't occur to me that I should write down what stories they were. I was just taking first lines of stories that I really liked, and I can probably go back and tell you, fill that in sometime of what they are. Like, what do you expect from a story that opens, "It is the 9th morning"? What a good opening, huh? Because we wonder what happened from the 1st to the 8th mornings. A first line is it's a tease, it's a come on, you know. I hate to say that, put it in that way, but it's designed to intrigue. The first paragraph should bring your reader in. The first line has to be intriguing. Put it down, she says, S-E-Z. So that's going to be a voicey piece. We want it, we're right in the middle of action. You know, these are all short story openings. Put it down, she says. You know, what do I have, or what does the other character have? And the fact that she S-E-Z tells me it's going to be very voicey. So that's going to be an interesting piece. Down in Holywell, we have 5 houses, 3 large and 2 small. Well, that's kind of interesting. Landed family of some sort. Gives you a bit of a scent of that story, of what it's going to be. It happened slowly, and it happened twice. Again, it's the mystery that makes us lean forward and want to hear more. So whenever we're given a little less than complete information, it actually makes the reader more attentive. They come forward. I didn't see my friend Walter for many years. That's a good opening. Makes you come forward. This is one of my favorites. I think it's Joyce Carol Oates. It smells like Joyce Carol Oates. The raw November afternoon sky moved from south to north over the heads of the 2 children in a cold and muscular dance of digestion. Okay, this gives you the landscape. It's bleak. It is raw November. So what's raw? When you have weather like that, we've talked about weather. You can use weather to represent internal feelings. You can use it for mood, setting up mood, that raw Novemberness on the edge of, it's cheerless, it's drab, it's getting cold, it's kind of a harbinger of death. The raw November afternoon sky moved from south to north, which is a reversal of commonly we think of cold air coming down from the north to the south. So this movement from south to north seems kind of eerie. It's unnatural. There's an eeriness about it. over the heads of two children. So over the heads, the children might not be aware that this is happening. So whatever it is that is roiling up there is not necessarily noticed by the two children. So something's going on probably in their lives that they're not noticing, that this is setting up. In a single sentence, in a cold and muscular dance of digestion. So from that, I'm getting images of a python, eating these children, the cold and muscular dance of digestion. But it's the very sky that's doing it, and it's moving in a wrong direction, and the whole thing is just extremely ominous. That's a sentence. That's the opening sentence of a short story. And we have the feel, we're already worried about the children. We know something. If somebody can describe a cold and muscular dance or digestion, we will not be surprised if there's some violence in this story. So it's a gateway, and it's telling us it's cutting out its terrain with the very first sentence. There had been a war fought and won, and the great city of the conquering people was crossed with triumphal arches and vivid with thrown flowers of white, red, and rose. So this is some kind of a celebration, but there had just been a war, and we can also imagine the dead and, wounds that these triumphal arches and the red and white roses represent. Here's a wonderful one, and this is definitely Fitzgerald. I'm going to say it's Bernice bobs her hair. After dark on Saturday night, one could stand on the first tee of the golf course and see the country club windows as a yellow expanse over a very black and wavy ocean. So this sentence really sets you up for the story, because it has so many cues. After dark on Saturday night, well, who's gonna, one could stand on the flat tee of the first tee of the golf course. So on a Saturday night, somebody is standing on the first tee of the golf course and see the country club windows as a yellow expanse over a very black and wavy ocean. So we have the first tee, we're standing outside on the golf course in the first tee, so somebody is familiar with the landscape because they know that this is the first tee, even in the dark. And they're standing in the dark in the golf course, looking over at the lighted windows of a country club like a great ocean liner on a black sea, and there's an expanse between the watcher and that club, like you're drowning in the sea, you're swimming, and out there is this ocean liner that could save you. And so it's this outsider, somebody looking from the darkness towards this figure of light, but familiar with where he's standing, or she, we know it's he, where they're standing. That is a classic Fitzgerald situation, as somebody yearning to be rescued by that yellow expanse, the yellow over the very black and wavy ocean, which is the class divide, right? You have to get through that class divide to get onto the boat and be saved. What a beautiful sentence to open a short story with. So there's a lot of compression. I owe the discovery of Oak Bar to the conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. Okay, well, this is Borges. That's recognizable. A conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. Well, conjunction is a word that is usually used in, it's kind of a magical term, it's an astrological term. It's a mirror and encyclopedia. So a mirror is self-examination, right? and an encyclopedia is the wisdom of one's civilization. And it makes you wonder if Ukbar is a real place, probably magical. So he sets up his magical universe with the first. I mean, Borges is amazing, and there are always mirrors, labyrinths, encyclopedias, dictionaries, libraries, winding gardens. So this is definitely, even though I don't know who, I didn't write who this was, I know that it's Borges. Today she's buying chicken legs. That's a different kind of a story. Who buys chicken legs? Well, probably, I think this is an older story, and chicken legs were probably the cheapest part of the chicken. So today she's buying chicken legs. I have a feeling that this is going to be a story set in not the Depression, because in the Depression they didn't buy chicken legs, they didn't buy anything, they bought beans. So maybe for the 40s, but still, somewhat people of somewhat modest means. And we're going to get a story about, I'm envisioning New York, 40s, maybe, I don't know who. I'm thinking Malamud. Could be anybody. The brass nails of lions scratched the wax. Okay, that's a whole different deal. The brass nails of lions scratched the wax. That's going to be exotic. So you see how the first sentence, anyway, you don't do that right away. You often go back and make sure that it opens. Where a book should open is usually not a first pass thing. Where a story should open. Generally, a story opens as close to the action, the beginning of where something changes. A man, what is it? A stranger came to town. A stranger came to town. One day, like, you get maybe a little bit of what the town sat on, blah, 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 But today, stranger came to town. Where you're closest to the change is where usually a story begins. A novel, you want to have a feeling for the size. I like to see a feeling for the size of it, for where we are, who is speaking, who the narrator is. Short stories have to give you all that information in a much more compressed way. So I thought I would look at some of the openings to some of my favorite stories and books. But I did want to talk about the novel opening when I struggled with the opening on one of my books, which was Painted Black, which I had figured it's a story about a girl who discovers that her beloved boyfriend has killed himself. And the way I had written it, I'd always conceived of it, is that we come upon her after the funeral, and as it's a story of her survival, of the survivors of suicide interests me more than the act of desperate people, because more people experience the survival than people who actually kill themselves. Everyone around any one person kills themselves, 20, 30, 40 people survive them, and they all carry these feelings, and I think that needed to be explored. So I have her after the funeral. That's where we open, and she's just on the bed. She's inert. She can't answer the phone. Her friends are trying to get her to, stand up and do something, and she has to get on with her life, even though, the whole central part of her life is over, that her boyfriend is dead. And my editor kept sending it back, saying, it doesn't start. It doesn't start. And I kept amping up. And I could not get it to start. And then somebody in my writer's workshop, my writer's group, suggested that I start with her having to identify him in the at the morgue, which I had her remember doing, but not doing in an active scene. And I was really scared of doing it because I would have to go to the morgue. I'd have to do direct observation. You can't make that stuff up. But after like 5 or 6 tries to get it to start, I ended up doing that. So the book starts with the getting to know, first we get to know the character and who they are before the suicide. So I have her she's an art model, so I have her working and talking to the artist and thinking about the boy. So we set up the boy and where their relationship is, and then she gets the call to come and ID him. So then it started. So it has to start. I couldn't go. That was a very interior book, but it needed to start in real-time action. So that's what it means, start close to the action, not after the action. That was, a learning experience. Every novel's a learning experience. So here's some of my favorite short stories. This is Bear and His Daughter. And anybody who's listened to me, I think that Robert Stone is, one of our absolute geniuses. And one of my very favorite stories of his is called Por qué no tiene por qué le falta, about expats in Mexico. This is somebody's yelling about, the words came on the wind, an old woman's voice. And it's somebody's yelling about scorpions. Escorpiones. He was lying in a smelly hammock under a concrete veranda with a thermos jug of Coke and alcohol balanced on his bare belly. When he understood the words, he raised his head and pushed back the brim of his baseball cap. Escorpiones. His children were running through dry brush between his house and the beach. The fiery sunlight, their speeding forms were brown. In the fiery sunlight, their speeding forms were brown blurs topped with the flax of sun-bleached hair. He saw at once they had not been bitten. So we hear there's danger, there's children, they're bleached, sun-bleached, in fiery sunlight. He's not all that together. He's lying in the hammock with the, I worry about these children. But it certainly sets us up that this is some gringo guy who is living in Mexico with his children. Sets us up. That's a short story opening. Here's one of my very favorite stories by William Faulkner. Boy, what a short story writer. Faulkner, one of my very favorite writers. And here's the beginning of probably his best story ever, which is Barn Burning. The store in which the Justice of the Peace's court was sitting smelled of cheese. Okay, so we're deep in the country. It smelled of cheese. So that sort of undercuts the authority of the court right there. So it's a bit of a Cracker Barrel court. The boy, crouched on his nail keg at the back of the crowded room, knew he smelled cheese and more. From where he sat, he could see the rank shelves close packed with the solid, squat, dynamic shapes of tin cans, whose labels his stomach read. So this is a hungry boy in the back of the courtroom. He's distracted by all the food and the smell of cheese. Not from the lettering, which meant nothing to his mind, illiterate, but from the scarlet devils. Scarlet devils, you lay it in there. There's symbols right there. Scarlet devils and silver curve of fish. This, the cheese, which he knew he smelled, and the hermetic meat. And that hermetic is interesting because it's telling you that he's not going to tell the story in the boy's point of view that closely. You use a word like hermetic. You're in Faulkner's voice describing the boy. So we have a bit of a distance, which his intestines believed he smelled, coming in intermittent gusts, momentary and brief, between the other constant one, the smell and sense, just a little of fear, because mostly of despair and grief, the old fierce pull of blood. So he smells food, a hungry boy smelling food. There's fear, and there is the smell of blood, the old fierce pull of blood. So something really primal going on there. He could not see the table where the justice sat, and before which his father and his father's enemy, our enemy, he thought in that despair, just a little of fear because mostly of despair and grief. So he feels this little boy is feeling these intense emotions. Then we look at the father, and there's the despair right there. Our enemy, he thought in that despair, ourn, mine and his and both, he's my father, stood. But he could hear them, the two of them, that is, because his father had said no word yet. So his father is on trial for something, and the boy is just full of all of this emotion. So this is putting pressure on a very small person at the beginning of a short story, which puts tremendous pressure on that child. It's an amazing story. And it tells you you're going to hear a little bit of the dialect of the actual people, but you're going to be in an author's point of view who's going to make sure you really understand all the nuances that you're seeing. You can be in good hands with Mr. Faulkner. Then we have Mr. Fitzgerald, another amazing short story writer. I like a story called Winter Dreams in this one. There's a lot of them. Let's see, Winter's Dreams. Let's see if I can find it. Here's Winter Dreams. Here's another golf course. Okay, here's another golf course. Some of the caddies were poor as sin and lived in one-room houses with a neurasthenic cow, so this is obviously not the voice of those boys, in the front yard. But Dexter Green's father owned the second-best grocery store in Black Bear. The best one was the Hub, patronized by the wealthy people from Sherry Island, and Dexter caddied only for pocket money. So Winter Dreams is going to be about a boy who is halfway between the poorest sin caddies who lived in one-room houses with the cow in the front yard. But this one boy's father has a grocery store, not the best, but has a grocery store. But he's not from the wealthy people from Sherry Island. He only caddied for pocket money, so he is like between those wealthy people and the poorest sin caddies. He is kind of a fish out of water here. So Winter Dreams is going to be a story about class, which, mostly Fitzgerald is about class, the great American subject. And we're going to have somebody who could see through both eyes. Here's a short story collection that I admire very much. First Body by Melanie Ray Thon. And First Body, let's see how that opens. Two nurses with scissors. These are short stories. Two nurses with scissors could make a man naked in 11 seconds. Sid Elliott had been working emergency 8 months, and it amazed him every time. Slicing through denim and leather, they peeled men open faster than Sid's father flayed rabbits. So it's about the body, and how fast the clothes can disappear that seem to separate us from the animals, and we're right back where we were. And then we've introduced our hero, Sid Elliott, and that Sid comes from a family where the father flays rabbits, so he's very familiar with realities of the flesh. He's not somebody who's surprised at that, but he's surprised at the nurses with their scissors and how fast men can become like those rabbits. So that's a really interesting, what a great short story writer. So those are really, it's really interesting to look at your favorite short stories, knowing, how fast they set it up. Then in novels, you put the camera further back, and you give us time to understand. One of the things that my brilliant teacher, Kate Braverman, used to say is you do not, she had like lots of rules. She was a real, she had a lot of rules that, were by their hyperbole, could be questioned, but they're good rules of thumb. Never have anybody waking up in a cold sweat, because a lot of beginner writing, people wake up in a cold sweat. Just try something more elegant, try something more specific and closer. Short stories closer to the beginning of action. A novel starts further back. So I thought I'd bring some examples of really good novel openings. Well, here's the classic. Let's see. Here's a classic. How about Moby Dick? If that isn't the best opening ever, that's my vote for the best opening of any novel ever. Call Me Ishmael. Several years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing dim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself, now look at this sentence, I guess there's one period so far. Whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses, it's the way I stave off the thoughts of death. And then here I've come across a coffin warehouse, and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet. And especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. Then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. So he's talking about suicide. I quietly take it to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men, in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. And he starts talking about Manhattan. Beautiful opening. From the language, you're instantly going to understand the seafaring song, the seafaring tale we're going to be hearing. We understand the character's mood. This chilly November, the raw November sky, I guess we had some echo. And we understand there's kind of a walking pace to this, and that it's not going to start with people arguing or something like that. We're going to take our time. We're strolling. We need to get to sea. We're in a grim state of mind, and aware that we are, and looking for a way out. So that's beautiful. How does Play Does It Lay start? She has a minimalist style. She begins this way. Maria, that's the character name, chapter head. What makes Iago evil? Some people ask. I never ask. That's a paradox. What makes Iago evil? Some people ask. I never ask. Well, she just asked. She just did. She just did what she said she would never do. So we have like we're so intrigued by somebody who immediately contradicts themselves. I mean, immediately, first sentence. Another example, one which springs to mind because Mrs. Burstein saw a pygmy rattler in the artichoke garden this morning and has been intractable ever since. I never ask about snakes. Why should Shalimar attract crates? She's doing it again. I never ask about snakes. And then she proceeds to tell us about snakes. Why should Shalimar attract crates? Why should a coral snake? Why should a coral snake need 2 glands of neurotoxic poison? So she's talking about snakes, poison, to survive, while a king snake so similarly marked needs none. Where is the Darwinian logic there? You might ask that. I never would. Never, not anymore. I recall an incident reported not long ago in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner. 2 honeymooners, natives of Detroit, found dead in their scout camper near Boca Raton, a coral snake still coiled in the thermal blanket. Why? Unless you are prepared to take the long view, there is no satisfactory answers to such questions. So this is somebody who has spent a lot of time asking why, and they will tell you that they never ask and then ask. So this is a completely unreliable narrator, but fascinating. There's a contradictory character, and you're going to understand there's going to be small violences like snake in the sleeping bag kind of thing. Worry, somebody who is obsessively worried and asks the same question. What makes Iago evil? Why do some snakes have poison and some don't? Why? That's the beating heart. That's the beating heart of Plato's Lays. Those questions, those unanswerable questions that nevertheless keep being asked, while the character says, I'll never ask that question. That's a novel opening. Here is The Lover by Marguerite Duras. Love her. One day I was already old. That's the beginning of a sentence. First sentence. One day I was already old. In the entrance of a public place, a man came up to me. He introduced himself and said, I've known you for years. Everyone says you were beautiful when you were young, but I want to tell you, I think you're more beautiful now than then. Rather than your face as a young woman, I prefer your face as it is, ravaged. So somebody who knew her when she was young and beautiful, and now she is already old and ravaged, and presumably ravaged by the experience that we are about to read in the book The Lover. I just love that. I often think of the image only as I see now, and of which I've never spoken. So we're going to never have spoken about this, and now we're speaking of this. It's always there in the same silence, amazing. It's the only image of myself I like, the only one in which I recognize myself, in which I delight. Very early in my life, it was too late. It was already too late when I was 18. Between 18 and 25, my face took off in a new direction. I grew old at 18. I don't know if it's the same for everyone. I've never asked. So something tremendous happened to her when she was young. We know that, and this is the story. So she's opened the door. This is how you create a doorway, and then you open the door. Under the Volcano, one of my very favorite novels, begins with 2 characters who are not even the main character. The main character, they talk about the main character. Everybody talks about the main character, and he doesn't even come in until, I believe it is, when does he come in? We have minor characters talking about major characters. until page 50. 50 pages, we don't get the main character. And I call that the Shakespearean opening. Shakespearean opening has minor characters who talk about the king. And then finally the king comes on. So this, we get a feeling for the environment. We get a detailed understanding of the main character, so that when he comes on, we're surprised at that he seems so much more rational than these characters are revealing that he is. Some of the symbols have already been set up that recur and recur and recur. So that's a very interesting way to start a book, is to have other people talk about the king. This is a book you can study. The things he does are so original and surprising, and not a conventionally told book at all. I recommend that one highly. Here is my favorite Dennis Johnson book. Everybody likes Jesus' Son and Train Dreams, and he is just a genius. Tree of Smoke, his Vietnam novel, was amazing. But this is actually my favorite book of his. I often like a minor book. I wouldn't call it a minor book, but his fans haven't even read it. It just happens to be my favorite of his, called Already Dead. And it begins this way. Van Ness, in August 7th, 1990, so specific time. Van Ness felt a gladness and wonder as he drove past the small isolated towns along US 101 in Northern California. A certain interest, a yearning. So we have a character, we have a location, we have isolation, a certain interest, a yearning, because he sensed they were places a person could disappear into. So here's a person who would like to disappear. There's the yearning. They felt like little naps you might never wake up from. You might throw a tire and hike to a gas station and stumble unexpectedly onto the rest of your life. The people who would finally mean something to you, a woman, an immortal friend, a saving fellowship in the religion of some obscure church. But such a thing as a small detour into deep and permanent changes, at the time anyway that he was traveling down the coast from Seattle into Mendocino County, wasn't even to be dreamt of in Van Ness's world. And then the side trip he took off 101 into Humboldt County only proved it. So it's a side trip. It is a small detour that leads to big changes, and it's right there at the beginning of this book. But it takes its time. It has the pacing of a larger work, which it is, and it puts us right into Humboldt County, Redwood country, and we go deeper into the heart as we get off the highway. Let's see. Here is a wonderful, amazing book called Palinuro of Mexico by Fernando del Paso. And this is like, he is a very incantatory writer. So the rhythm and the word choice and the repetitiveness and the kind of, it's not a magical realism in that the character is so imaginative. He can imagine these magical things happening, but he's not saying they're actually happening. It doesn't matter if they're actually happening or not. It begins called The Grand Illusion is his first chapter. The science of medicine was a spirit which haunted Palinuro's heart throughout his life. So that starts grand. We're going to talk about a man's life, so it gives us a feel for the scope of the book. Sometimes it was a sad spirit drawing along the hospital corridors of this earth, a train of floating kidneys and iron camisoles. So he has a bit of a sense of humor. At others, it was a wise spirit which came to him in dreams to offer to him as Athene to Asclepius, Asclepius, 2 vials filled with blood, the first serving to resuscitate his dear departed, and the second to destroy them and himself both. So medicine is going to play a part in this. Sadness and wisdom. And this, it gives you a feeling for I hate to say the verbosity of the prose, but definitely the exuberance of its language is going to be, that train of floating kidneys and iron camisoles, such a humor to it, that it's one of my absolute favorites. And then I'm going to read one more opener. This is a memoir by a poet. And this is a book I read when I need inspiration, when I feel like out of touch with things. And it's The Winged Seed by Lee Young Lee. It's a memoir, but this could easily have been a novel. If it wasn't about him, I could see it as a novel. So this is, instead of having your characters wake up in a cold sweat and smoke a bowl, let's leave that out. Try this, for example. 2 a.m. I wake to rain, apartments dark where other travelers sleep. In my dream, my father came back, dressed in the clothes we'd buried him in, carrying a jar of blood in one hand, his suit pockets lined with black seeds. If you're going to do dreams, do specifics. Don't just, I dreamt that somebody was trying to strangle me. Detail. His gray wool suit seemed hardly worn, except for the shoulders and elbows, which were buffed smooth, I guess, from rubbing against his narrow coffin. And then I saw his shoes. They were completely wrecked, their leather cracked, nick-creased, cross-creased, their puckered seams where the stitching came unraveled betrayed his naked feet. Sockless, his ankles were frightening, and only the thinnest soles kept him from walking in bare feet. I began to cry, realizing he'd walked the whole way. So we're going to do dreams. That's an interesting dream to start out with. And then he does come back into the room where his wife is sleeping, but the dream of his father is the event that begins the memoir, which could easily have been a novel. It is a beautiful opener. So anyway, where chapters should open is close to the action. Where novels should open is, obviously it's where things change. There's going to be a change. And the first paragraphs, the opening, you create that gate and then walk through it. So often it's easier to know what the house is and then create an opening that is appropriate to the house. You don't want to go through a Balinese gate and see a colonial house. It's like, whoa, that doesn't go. So you want the beginning to intrigue you, to in a compressed way for a story, for a novel, to set the world, to give us a feel of who we are, when we are, what's the character's problem. So what else can I tell you about openers? I'm sorry, some people are saying the reception has been weak, which, yes, the production values. This is not HBO. Any questions about openings? No? All right. Well, I want you to take a look at your favorite stories you know well, books you know well, and look at the openings and how they do it. Chapters should start close to the action. Scenes, where does a scene start? What character? You have to be very clear on the emotional quality that is beginning the scene, and then how it changes. And you can use all kinds of landscape, set them, you can set the mood using landscape, using weather, using light, set up the problem. In Moby Dick, he tells you what the problem is directly, and he moves you into his world. So what about the second sentence? These are the first paragraphs, maybe 2 paragraphs, the opening of the book, the opening of a book. Take a look at him. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.